Maria Santos had always been different from other girls in her small village near the Afghan border. While her friends dreamed of marriage and children, she dreamed of serving her country. At 23, she had already proven herself as one of the most skilled communication specialists in the Pakistani military. Her ability to intercept enemy transmissions and coordinate rescue operations had saved countless lives. The morning of March 15th started like any other day at the remote outpost. Maria was monitoring radio frequencies when she picked up chatter about a planned attack on a nearby village. The intelligence suggested that a group of heavily armed militants was planning to raid the settlement, where over 200 innocent civilians lived, including many children and elderly people. Maria immediately reported the intercepted communications to her commanding officer, Colonel Ahmed. The situation was critical. The village was too far for immediate military backup, and the local police force was too small to handle such a large group of attackers. However, there was a small observation post positioned strategically between the militant camp and the village. "We need someone to establish a communication relay point," Colonel Ahmed explained to his team. "Someone needs to get to that observation post and coordinate with Allied forces in the area. It's dangerous, but it's our only chance to save those villagers." Without hesitation, Maria volunteered for the mission. She knew the risks involved, but she also knew that her skills in communications and her knowledge of the local terrain made her the best candidate for the job. Her colleagues tried to talk her out of it, warning her about the dangers of operating alone in hostile territory. "Those people in the village have families, just like we do," Maria told her worried teammates. "If we don't act now, innocent children will die. I can't live with that on my conscience." Maria packed her equipment carefully. She carried an advanced radio system, emergency medical supplies, ammunition, and enough food and water for 3 days. Her plan was simple but risky. Reach the observation post, establish communication with nearby Allied forces, and coordinate a defense until backup could arrive. The journey to the observation post took her through rough mountain terrain. She traveled mostly at night to avoid detection, using her knowledge of the local landscape to navigate through valleys and rocky passages. The observation post was an old stone building that had been used by various military forces over the years. It sat on high ground, giving it a perfect view of the village below and the surrounding area. When Maria reached the post just before dawn, she immediately set up her radio equipment. The building was small and basic, with thick stone walls that provided good protection but limited visibility. She established contact with a U.S. Navy SEAL team that was operating in the region, as well as with a Pakistani Army unit that was several hours away. Through her radio communications, Maria learned that the militant group was larger than initially thought. Intelligence reports suggested they had heavy weapons and were planning to attack the village at sunset. The SEAL team was willing to help, but they were currently engaged in another operation and couldn't reach the area until the following day. "We need someone to delay the attack," the SEAL commander told Maria through the radio. "If you can slow them down or disrupt their plans, we can get there in time to help." Maria looked out at the peaceful village below. She could see children playing in the streets and women hanging clothes to dry. They had no idea what was coming their way. She made a decision that would change everything. "I'll hold this position," she radioed back. "I can see their approach routes from here. If I can make them think there's a larger force defending the area, maybe I can buy us the time we need." The SEAL commander was hesitant. "That's a dangerous plan. You're just one person against a large group of armed militants. Sometimes one person in the right place can make all the difference," Maria replied. "I won't let those villagers down." As the sun began to set, Maria spotted movement in the distance. Through her binoculars, she could see the militant group approaching. They were moving in an organized formation, carrying automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. There were at least 30 of them, maybe more. Maria took a deep breath and prepared for what would become the longest night of her life. She checked her weapons, tested her radio one more time, and positioned herself at the best vantage point in the observation post. She knew that once she started firing, there would be no turning back. The militants were moving slowly and carefully, probably expecting some resistance but not knowing exactly what they would face. Maria waited until they were in range, then fired her first shot. The bullet struck one of the lead fighters, and immediately the entire group took cover. For the next several hours, Maria engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the militants. She would fire from one window, then quickly move to another position before they could return fire effectively. She used her knowledge of military tactics to make it seem like there were multiple defenders in the building. The militants tried several times to advance toward the village, but each time Maria's accurate shooting forced them to retreat and seek cover. She was buying precious time, but she knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Her ammunition was limited, and the militants were starting to figure out that they were facing just one defender. As midnight approached, Maria radioed the SEAL team with an update. "I've been able to slow them down, but they're regrouping. It looks like they're planning a coordinated assault on my position." "Hold on, Maria," the SEAL commander replied. "We're moving as fast as we can. Just a few more hours and we'll be there." Maria looked out at the village one more time. The lights in the houses were starting to go out as families went to sleep, still unaware of the danger nearby. She gripped her rifle tighter and prepared for the battle that would test everything she had learned about courage, sacrifice, and never giving up. The militants had learned from their earlier failed attempts. Instead of charging directly at the observation post, they split into 3 groups and began surrounding the building. Maria could see them moving through the darkness, using the rocky terrain to stay hidden while they positioned themselves for a coordinated attack. Through her radio, she maintained contact with both the SEAL team and the Pakistani Army unit. "They're surrounding my position," she reported quietly. "I count at least 30 fighters, possibly more. They have heavy weapons. Maria, you need to consider withdrawing." Colonel Ahmed's voice crackled through the radio. "You've done enough. Those villagers owe you their lives already." "Negative," Maria replied firmly. "If I leave now, they'll reach the village before dawn. There are too many innocent people down there." The first coordinated assault began just after 2 a.m. The militants opened fire from 3 different directions, their bullets slamming into the stone walls of the observation post. Maria kept low, moving from window to window, returning fire whenever she had a clear shot. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountains, but the village below remained quiet and unaware. Maria's training kicked in as she fought against overwhelming odds. She had studied guerrilla warfare tactics and knew that her best advantage was the defensive position and her intimate knowledge of the building's layout. The stone walls were thick and provided good protection, but the windows were her only way to engage the enemy. During a brief pause in the fighting, Maria heard voices speaking in a language she recognized. The militants were planning to use rocket-propelled grenades to destroy parts of the building and force her out into the open. She knew that once they brought heavy weapons into play, her defensive advantage would disappear. "SEAL team, what's your ETA?" she radioed urgently. "We're still 6 hours out," came the reply. "Can you hold that long?" Maria looked at her remaining ammunition. She had been conservative with her shots, but 6 hours seemed like an eternity. "I'll find a way," she promised. The militants launched their next attack with renewed intensity. This time they used the RPGs, and Maria felt the building shake as explosions rocked the observation post. Part of the roof collapsed, filling the air with dust and debris. A piece of flying stone cut her forehead, and blood ran down into her eyes. Despite the damage, the main structure of the building held. Maria wiped the blood from her face and continued fighting. She had noticed that the militants were becoming frustrated with her resistance. They had expected to overwhelm the position quickly and move on to the village, but one determined defender was disrupting their entire plan. As the hours passed, Maria began to feel the effects of the sustained battle. Her hearing was damaged from the constant gunfire and explosions. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. But every time she thought about giving up, she looked down at the peaceful village and found new strength to continue. Around 4 a.m., the militants tried a different approach. They began setting up a heavy machine gun on a ridge that overlooked the observation post. Maria realized that once that weapon was in position, she would be completely pinned down and unable to defend herself effectively. She made a dangerous decision. Instead of staying in the relative safety of the building, she grabbed her rifle and some ammunition and slipped out through a hole in the back wall that had been created by one of the RPG attacks. Moving carefully through the darkness, she worked her way around to a position where she could engage the machine gun crew. The climb was treacherous, and Maria had to move slowly to avoid making noise that would alert the militants to her position. Her muscles ached, and her wounded forehead continued to bleed, but she pressed on. She knew that if the machine gun became operational, it would be the end of her defense. Maria reached a position about 200 meters from where the militants were setting up their heavy weapon. Through her rifle scope, she could see 3 men working to assemble the machine gun. She took careful aim and fired 3 quick shots. All 3 militants fell, and the machine gun threat was eliminated. But her attack had revealed her new position to the other militants. They immediately began firing in her direction, forcing her to take cover behind a large boulder. She was now trapped outside the observation post with limited cover and no easy way to get back to her defensive position. The situation was becoming desperate. Maria had approximately 2 hours of ammunition left, and the militants were closing in on her position. She could hear them communicating with each other, coordinating their movements to surround her hiding spot. "SEAL team, I'm in serious trouble here," she radioed. "I'm pinned down outside the building. I don't think I can hold out much longer." "Stay strong, Maria," the SEAL commander responded. "We're pushing as hard as we can. You're saving hundreds of lives." As dawn began to break over the mountains, Maria could see the militants moving closer to her position. She had managed to keep them away from the village for over 6 hours, but her situation was becoming impossible. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on ammunition. The final assault began as the sun came up. The militants, frustrated by hours of resistance from a single defender, launched an all-out attack on Maria's position. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around her, and she could hear the enemy fighters shouting as they advanced. Maria fought back with everything she had. She moved from rock to rock, firing at any militant who exposed himself. Her marksmanship training served her well, and several attackers fell to her accurate shooting. But there were simply too many of them. A grenade exploded near her position and shrapnel tore through her left arm. Another explosion damaged her radio, cutting off her communication with the outside world. Maria was now completely alone, wounded, and surrounded by enemies who were determined to end her resistance once and for all. The sun was now fully up, and Maria's position behind the boulder had become completely exposed. Blood from her wounded arm was soaking through her uniform, and she could feel her strength starting to fade. The militants had regrouped and were preparing for what they believed would be their final assault. Through the morning light, Maria could see at least 20 fighters positioned in a semicircle around her hiding spot. They had learned to respect her shooting ability and were staying behind cover, but they were slowly tightening the circle. She knew that within minutes they would be close enough to overwhelm her position. Maria checked her ammunition one last time. She had exactly 13 bullets left, against 20 armed militants. Those 13 shots would have to count more than any shots she had ever fired in her life. She thought about her family back home, about the villagers sleeping peacefully below, and about all the training that had brought her to this moment. The militants began their final advance. They moved carefully from rock to rock, communicating with hand signals and supporting each other's movements. Maria waited until they were close enough that she couldn't miss, then began firing her remaining bullets with deadly precision. Her first shot dropped the militant leader who was directing the assault. Her second and third shots took down 2 fighters who were trying to flank her position from the left. The remaining militants took cover, but Maria could see them preparing to rush her position all at once. She fired her remaining 10 bullets in rapid succession, each shot carefully aimed at any militant who exposed himself. When her rifle clicked empty, Maria reached for her sidearm, but she knew it was nearly over. She had fought for almost 8 hours against impossible odds, but the mathematics of warfare were finally catching up with her. The militants realized she was out of ammunition and began their final charge. Maria drew her pistol and managed to fire 3 more shots before a bullet struck her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her weapon flying from her hand. More shots rang out, and Maria felt the impacts as bullets tore through her body. She was hit in the leg, then in the chest, then in the other arm. The militants were taking no chances with the defender who had caused them so much trouble. They continued firing even as she fell to the ground behind the boulder. When the shooting finally stopped, Maria lay motionless among the rocks. She had been shot 11 times and blood was pooling beneath her body. The militants approached carefully, expecting to find her dead. The leader of the group kicked her rifle away and checked for signs of life. "She's finished," one of them said in their native language. This woman fought like 10 soldiers. The militants were eager to move on to their original target. They had lost valuable time and several fighters to Maria's resistance, and they wanted to complete their mission before any reinforcements could arrive. They gathered their weapons and began moving toward the village, leaving Maria's body where it had fallen. But Maria wasn't dead. The 11 bullets had caused massive trauma to her body, but somehow none of them had struck vital organs. She had lost a tremendous amount of blood and was unconscious, but her heart was still beating. Her body had gone into shock, slowing her breathing and heart rate so much that she appeared lifeless to the militants who had checked her. As the militants moved away from her position, Maria slowly began to regain consciousness. The pain was overwhelming and she could barely move, but she was alive. Through blurred vision, she could see the group of fighters making their way down the mountain toward the village. Even in her severely wounded state, Maria's first thought was about the innocent people who were still in danger. She tried to reach for her damaged radio, hoping to warn someone about the approaching attack. Her left arm was useless, shattered by bullets, but she managed to drag herself a few feet toward where the radio had fallen. The radio was badly damaged by shrapnel from one of the earlier grenade explosions, but some of the circuits were still intact. Maria's knowledge of communications equipment helped her identify which wires might still be functional. Using her one good hand and fighting through waves of pain and dizziness, she began trying to repair the damaged device. Working on the radio was almost impossible in her condition. She kept losing consciousness for short periods and her vision would blur from blood loss. But each time she started to fade, she would think about the families in the village and force herself to stay focused on the task. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Maria managed to get a weak signal on the radio. She could hear fragments of communication between the SEAL team and other military units in the area. With enormous effort, she managed to key the microphone. "This is Maria," she whispered into the radio, her voice barely audible. "The militants. They're moving to the village. I'm hit, but still here." The response was immediate. "Maria, we thought you were dead. What's your status?" 11 hits, she managed to say. "I can see them moving toward the village. You need to warn the people." The SEAL commander's voice came through the static. "Maria, we're 30 minutes out. Can you still observe their movements?" Maria forced herself to lift her head and look down toward the village. Through her damaged vision, she could see the militants spreading out as they approached the settlement. They were moving carefully, probably expecting some kind of resistance after the fierce fight they had encountered at the observation post. They're setting up positions around the village," Maria reported with great difficulty. "Looks like they're planning to attack from multiple directions. Keep observing if you can," came the reply. "Your intelligence is saving lives." Maria knew she was dying. She could feel her life slowly slipping away with each drop of blood that left her body. But she also knew that her observations could help the incoming rescue force save the villagers. With tremendous willpower, she positioned herself so she could continue watching the militants' movements. For the next 25 minutes, Maria provided a steady stream of intelligence updates despite her critical injuries. She reported on the militants' positions, their weapons, and their apparent plan of attack. Her information allowed the SEAL team to plan their approach and coordinate with other forces in the area. "SEAL team is 5 minutes out," the radio crackled. "Maria, you've done the impossible. Help is almost there." Maria smiled weakly as she heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching. She had held the line for over 8 hours, survived 11 bullet wounds, and continued to serve her mission even while dying. The villagers would be safe, and that was all that mattered to her. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the SEAL team approached the area. Maria could barely keep her eyes open, but she forced herself to maintain consciousness long enough to provide the final pieces of intelligence that could save lives. Through her failing vision, she watched as the militants below realized that military aircraft were approaching. "They know you're coming," Maria whispered into the radio. "They're taking defensive positions. Some are trying to use the villagers as human shields." The SEAL commander's voice was grim but determined. "We see them, Maria. Thanks to your intel, we know exactly where they are. You've given us every advantage we need." Maria heard the sharp crack of sniper rifles and the distinctive sound of precision military operations beginning. The SEALs had positioned themselves perfectly based on her intelligence reports. and they were systematically neutralizing the militant threat with surgical precision. From her position on the mountainside, Maria could see muzzle flashes and movement as the battle unfolded below, but the fight was nothing like the chaotic, desperate struggle she had endured through the night. This was a professional military operation, executed with overwhelming force and perfect coordination. Within 15 minutes, the gunfire in the village had stopped. Maria heard the SEAL commander's voice on the radio. "Village is secure. All militants neutralized. Civilians are safe." Then, after a pause, "Now let's go find our hero." Maria tried to respond, but she found that she no longer had the strength to key the radio microphone. The adrenaline that had kept her going through 8 hours of combat was finally wearing off, and her body was shutting down from massive blood loss and trauma. She could hear helicopters landing nearby and the sound of boots on rocky ground as the rescue team made their way up the mountain toward her position. Maria closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace knowing that her mission had been successful. The villagers were safe, the militants had been stopped, and help was finally arriving. Over here, she heard someone shout, "I found her!" Maria felt strong hands carefully examining her wounds and checking for vital signs. Through the fog of pain and exhaustion, she could hear voices discussing her condition in medical terms she didn't understand. Someone was starting an IV line in her arm while others were applying pressure bandages to her wounds. "She's got 11 GSWs, one medic reported. "I can't believe she's still alive, let alone conscious." Her vitals are weak but stable. A face appeared above Maria as someone knelt beside her. It was a man with kind eyes and the weathered features of an experienced soldier. "Ma'am, I'm Commander Peterson with SEAL Team 6. You've done something incredible here. We're going to take good care of you." Maria tried to speak but only managed a weak whisper. "The village? The village is safe," Peterson assured her. "Every single civilian is alive and unharmed because of what you did. You held that line for 8 hours against 30 armed militants. I've never seen anything like it." As the medics worked to stabilize her condition, Maria learned that her incredible stand had accomplished even more than she had realized. The militants she had fought were part of a larger terrorist network that had been planning coordinated attacks on several villages in the region. By disrupting their timeline and eliminating a significant portion of their force, her resistance had caused the entire operation to collapse. "Intelligence estimates that you saved over 1,000 lives last night," Commander Peterson told her as they prepared to evacuate her to a medical facility. Not just in the village below, but in 3 other settlements that were targeted for attack. The helicopter ride to the military hospital was a blur of medical activity and radio communications. Maria drifted in and out of consciousness as flight medics worked to keep her stable during the journey. She could hear fragments of conversation about her condition and the complex surgery that would be required to save her life. At the hospital, Maria was rushed directly into emergency surgery. The medical team worked for over 12 hours to repair the damage from her 11 gunshot wounds. The bullets had fractured bones, damaged organs, and caused massive internal bleeding, but somehow they had missed her heart, major arteries, and brain. During the long hours of surgery, word of Maria's heroic stand began to spread throughout the military community. Her commanders, fellow soldiers, and allies from multiple countries all wanted to know about the young communications specialist who had single-handedly held off a major terrorist attack. When Maria finally woke up 3 days later, she found herself in a hospital bed surrounded by flowers, cards, and military officials from several different countries. Her parents were sitting beside her bed, tears of relief and pride in their eyes. "You're awake," her mother said softly, taking her hand. "We're so proud of you and so grateful that you're alive." Colonel Ahmed was also present, along with Commander Peterson and several other high-ranking officers. "Maria," the colonel said with emotion in his voice, "what you did up there has changed everything. You've shown the world what one person with courage and determination can accomplish." Commander Peterson stepped forward and presented Maria with a medal from the U.S. Navy. "This is the Navy Cross," he explained. "It's the second highest decoration for valor in combat. You've earned the respect and gratitude of every SEAL who served with me." Over the following weeks, as Maria slowly recovered from her injuries, she received visits and recognition from military leaders, government officials, and fellow soldiers from around the world. Her story had inspired people everywhere and had become a symbol of courage and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. But for Maria, the greatest reward was a simple letter she received from the village she had protected. It was signed by every family in the settlement, thanking her for giving them the chance to see another sunrise and watch their children grow up in safety. That letter meant more to her than all the medals and official recognition combined. Maria's recovery was long and challenging. The 11 bullet wounds had left her with permanent scars and ongoing health issues that would require years of physical therapy and medical treatment. 3 of the bullets remained in her body because removing them would cause more damage than leaving them in place. During her months in the hospital, Maria received thousands of letters from people around the world who had heard her story. Children sent her drawings of soldiers and heroes. Military families shared their own stories of service and sacrifice. Veterans from many different wars wrote to tell her that she represented the best of what it meant to serve others. One letter particularly touched her heart. It came from an 8-year-old girl named Aisha, who lived in the village Maria had protected. The letter was written in simple words with careful handwriting. "Dear soldier lady, my mama says you saved us from bad men. I was sleeping when it happened, but mama says you were very brave. I drew you a picture of a superhero because that's what you are. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Thank you for keeping my family safe. Love, Aisha." The letter came with a crayon drawing of a woman in military uniform with a big smile and arms outstretched like she was flying. Maria kept that drawing on her bedside table throughout her recovery, looking at it whenever the pain became difficult to bear. As news of Maria's heroic stand spread, military scholars and historians began studying her actions to understand how one person had been able to accomplish so much against such overwhelming odds. Her tactical decisions, use of terrain, and psychological warfare against the militants became subjects taught in military academies around the world. What Maria did wasn't just about marksmanship or military training, explained Professor Williams, a military historian who wrote extensively about her case. It was about understanding that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for territory or strategic advantage, but for the fundamental principle that innocent people deserve protection. Commander Peterson visited Maria regularly during her recovery. He had been deeply affected by her story and wanted to understand what had motivated her to make such extraordinary sacrifices. During one of their conversations, he asked her directly about her decision to volunteer for such a dangerous mission. "I keep thinking about that moment when you volunteered to go to the observation post," he said. "You knew it was dangerous. You knew you might not come back. What made you decide to go?" Maria was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I think about my little sister," she said finally. "She's the same age as some of those children in the village. If she was in danger and someone had the ability to help her, I would want them to act. How could I do any less for someone else's sister?" The conversation revealed something important about Maria's character that had driven her actions throughout that terrible night. She hadn't fought for glory or recognition, but from a simple human desire to protect others who couldn't protect themselves. As Maria's physical condition improved, she began participating in interviews and speaking engagements to share her story. Military leaders wanted her to speak to new recruits about courage and dedication. International organizations invited her to discuss the role of individual action in preventing larger conflicts. During one particularly meaningful speaking engagement, at a military academy, a young cadet asked Maria if she ever regretted her decision to hold the observation post. The question seemed to surprise her. "Regret?" she repeated, thinking carefully about her answer. "I regret that anyone had to die that night. I regret that there are people in the world who would harm innocent families. But do I regret standing between those militants and those villagers? Never. Some things are worth fighting for no matter what the cost." Her words had a profound impact on the cadets, many of whom would go on to distinguished military careers inspired by her example. Maria's story became more than just an account of one battle. It became a teaching tool about the values that should guide anyone who chooses to serve others. 6 months after the battle, Maria was well enough to return to the observation post where she had made her stand. Commander Peterson accompanied her on the journey, along with several members of the SEAL team who had participated in the rescue operation. Standing among the rocks where she had nearly died, Maria could see the village spread out peacefully below. Children were playing in the streets, and families were going about their daily lives in safety. The contrast with that terrible night couldn't have been more striking. "Do you know what I see when I look down there?" Maria asked Commander Peterson. "What do you see?" "I see a little girl named Aisha, who will grow up to have children of her own. I see families who will have birthday parties and weddings and graduations because they're still alive. I see a future that exists because sometimes one person decides to hold the line." Commander Peterson nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of her words. "And do you know what I see when I look at you?" "What's that?" "I see proof that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. You were terrified that night, but you never considered giving up." Maria smiled, remembering the fear and determination that had carried her through those 8 hours of combat. "Fear keeps you alive," she said, "but love for others gives you something worth staying alive for." As they prepared to leave the observation post, Maria placed a small stone monument among the rocks where she had fought. Engraved on it were simple words: "For Aisha and all the children who deserve to grow up in peace." Oh. 2 years after the battle, Maria had made a remarkable recovery. Though she still carried 3 bullets in her body and walked with a slight limp, she had returned to active duty in a new role. Instead of field operations, she now trained communication specialists and taught courses on tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. Her classes were always packed with eager students who wanted to learn from the woman who had held off 30 militants for 8 hours. But Maria always made sure to focus on the practical lessons rather than the dramatic details of her story. "The most important thing I can teach you," she would tell her students, "is that technology and weapons are just tools. What matters is your ability to think clearly under pressure and your commitment to the mission. Everything else is just details." During one of her training exercises, Maria was working with a young communications specialist named Lieutenant Sarah Chen. Sarah was talented but struggled with confidence during high-pressure simulations. After a particularly difficult exercise, Sarah approached Maria privately. "Ma'am, how do you stay calm when everything is going wrong?" Sarah asked. "I keep thinking about your story, about how you managed to think clearly even when you were wounded and surrounded." Maria considered the question carefully. "The secret isn't staying calm," she explained. "The secret is accepting that you're going to be afraid and working through that fear. When I was at that observation post, I was terrified every single minute, but I had a job to do, and people were counting on me. But how do you push through when you want to give up?" "You remember why you're there," Maria said simply. "I kept thinking about those families in the village, about children like Aisha who needed someone to stand between them and danger. When you have something bigger than yourself to fight for, your own fear becomes less important." Sarah nodded, understanding beginning to show in her eyes. "So it's not about being fearless. It's about caring more about others than you care about your own safety?" "Exactly. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing your duty anyway." That conversation became typical of Maria's interactions with the soldiers she trained. She had become more than just an instructor. She was a living example of what it meant to serve with honor and sacrifice. As word of Maria's teaching abilities spread, she began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and military academies around the world. Her story had become legendary, but Maria always insisted on focusing on the lessons rather than the heroics. During a speech at an international military conference, Maria addressed an audience of senior officers from dozens of countries. "I'm often asked about the tactical decisions I made during that battle," she began. "But the most important decision wasn't tactical at all. It was the decision to care more about others than I cared about myself." The audience listened intently as she continued. "Every one of you will face moments when you have to choose between personal safety and doing what's right. The training we give our soldiers is important, but the values we instill in them are even more important. We must teach them that some things are worth any sacrifice." After her speech, a general from the German army approached her with a question. "Major Santos, your story has inspired soldiers around the world. But I'm curious about something. Do you ever think about what would have happened if the SEALs hadn't arrived in time?" Maria smiled at the question. General, the SEALs did arrive in time, partly because I was able to delay the attack and provide intelligence. But even if they hadn't, I would have continued fighting until my last breath. Sometimes you don't fight because you know you'll win. You fight because it's the right thing to do. Her answer encapsulated the philosophy that had guided her actions throughout that terrible night and continued to guide her work training. The next generation of soldiers. 5 years after the battle, Maria received an unexpected visitor at her training facility. It was Aisha, the little girl who had written her the letter years earlier. Now 13 years old, Aisha had traveled with her family to meet the woman who had saved her village. I never forgot your letter, Maria told Aisha as they sat together in her office. I kept your drawing with me throughout my recovery. It reminded me why the fight was worth it. Aisha had grown into a confident young woman with dreams of becoming a doctor. I want to save lives too, she told Maria. Just like you did. You don't have to pick up a weapon to save lives, Maria replied. Doctors save lives every day. Teachers save lives by educating children. Engineers save lives by building safe bridges and clean water systems. There are many ways to serve others. But what you did was special, Aisha insisted. You risked everything for people you didn't even know. Maria thought about this for a moment. Aisha, what I did was my job. I was a soldier, and soldiers protect innocent people. What makes it special is that everyone has opportunities to help others. Even if they're not soldiers, you can make a difference in your own way. As Aisha and her family prepared to leave, the young girl presented Maria with another drawing. This one showed not just Maria as a superhero, but many different people helping others in various ways. I learned that there are many kinds of heroes, Aisha explained. Maria hung the new drawing in her office next to the original one from years earlier. It served as a daily reminder that her actions had inspired others to find their own ways to serve and protect. Today, Major Maria Santos continues her work training soldiers and sharing the lessons learned from that night at the observation post. Her story has become part of military history, studied in academies around the world. But for Maria, the most important legacy isn't the medals or recognition she has received. The most important legacy is the letter she received on the 10th anniversary of the battle. It came from Dr. Aisha Rahman, who had just completed her medical degree and was preparing to work in refugee camps helping displaced families find safety and healing. Dear Major Santos, the letter began. 10 years ago you showed me that one person with courage can change the world. Today I begin my own mission to help others. Thank you for teaching me that the greatest battles are fought not for conquest, but for the simple right of innocent people to live in peace. Maria keeps that letter in her desk drawer, a reminder that sometimes holding the line means more than just stopping an enemy attack. Sometimes it means holding the line between hope and despair, between safety and danger, between a world where good people stand up for others and a world where they do not. The observation post where Maria made her stand has been preserved as a memorial, not just to her actions but to all those who choose to protect others when the cost is high and the odds are impossible. Engraved at the entrance are words that capture the essence of her story. Here stood one who chose to serve others above herself, and by that choice, save the future.